Anna stood on the porch of her small wooden house, gazing at the sun rising over the rolling hills. The golden light touched everything in sight: the tall grasses, the trees, and her favorite part, the wildflower meadow that stretched beyond her beehives. This had been her home for as long as she could remember. Now, in her late 40s, Anna felt more connected to this land than ever before. It was quiet here, far from the noise of the town, but she liked it that way. The gentle hum of the bees, the rustle of the wind, and the songs of the birds were all the company she needed. Anna had inherited this life from her mother, who had taught her the art of beekeeping when she was just a girl. Her mother believed that bees were a gift from nature and that they deserved respect. Anna had always remembered that. She didn't use fancy machines or chemicals. Instead, she followed the old ways, letting the bees roam free, gathering nectar from the wildflowers, and only taking honey when the hive was strong and healthy. Every morning, Anna would walk out to check on her bees, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were part of the landscape herself. She had learned that rushing would only disturb the bees. They can feel your energy. Her mother used to say, if you're calm, they'll be calm. And so, Anna moved with the rhythm of nature, her heart steady and her mind clear. Her hives, built by her grandfather, stood in a neat row, tucked beneath a large oak tree. The bees buzzed around the entrance, darting in and out as they carried nectar back to the hive. Each hive had its own personality. Some were more active, with bees flying out early in the morning, while others were slow and quiet, taking their time to wake up with the sun. Anna knelt by one of the hives, gently lifting the lid to inspect it. Inside, the bees were hard at work, filling the honeycomb with golden sweetness. She smiled, satisfied with what she saw. The bees were thriving this season. The flowers had been plentiful, and the weather just right. Not too hot, not too cold. It was a good year for honey. Once a month, Anna would gather just enough honey to sell at the farmer's market in town. She never took too much, only what she needed. Her mother had taught her that bees needed their honey more than humans did. Without enough honey, the hive wouldn't survive the winter. Anna always left more than enough for her bees to get through the colder months. It was a delicate balance, but one that she had mastered over the years. At the market, her honey was always in high demand. People loved its rich, floral taste, which came from the wildflowers that grew on the hillsides. Anna didn't use any special labels or flashy jars, just simple glass containers filled with the pure, raw honey that her bees had worked so hard to make. The locals appreciated that. They knew that Anna's honey was different from the kind you found in stores. "Best honey in the county," they would say with a smile as they handed her the money, and Anna would nod, grateful but humble. It wasn't really her honey, she thought. It belonged to the bees. Life on the hillside was peaceful, but it wasn't always easy. There were days when the weather would turn suddenly, and she would worry about her hives. A strong wind or a heavy rainstorm could damage the fragile structures, and Anna would spend hours repairing them. But no matter how difficult things got, she never thought of leaving. This land, these bees, they were her family now. They depended on her, and in a way, she depended on them too. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Anna stood up and dusted off her knees. She closed the hive and watched the bees for a moment longer before heading back to the house. There was work to be done, honey to be harvested, and jars to be prepared for the market. But, as always, she would take only what was needed, no more, no less. That was the way her mother had taught her, and it was the way she would always live, respecting the delicate balance of nature, one jar of honey at a time. Anna had grown used to the quiet on the hillside. For years, the house down the hill had stood empty, its paint peeling and the garden overgrown. She had watched it slowly fade into the landscape, becoming just another part of the scenery. That was until one morning, when she noticed the sound of engines and saw a moving truck parked outside. A family was moving in. At first, Anna didn't think much of it. People came and went, and the hills had a way of keeping them at a distance. But over the next few days, she couldn't help but notice the activity down the hill. The new family, Mike, Laura, and their 2 children, Sam and Lily, were busy making changes. They cleared the yard, trimmed the trees, and put up a wooden fence. It was clear they were here to stay. Anna watched from her porch as they worked. Mike, a tall, broad-shouldered man with short brown hair, seemed to be in charge of everything. He barked orders to the movers, directed his kids, and was constantly on the go. His wife, Laura, was quieter, helping with the unpacking and keeping an eye on Sam and Lily, who were both full of energy, running around the yard, exploring their new home. One afternoon, as Anna was tending to her bees, she saw Mike walking up the hill toward her. He waved as he approached, a big smile on his face. Anna straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron. "Hi there. You must be Anna," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Mike, your new neighbor. My family just moved in down the hill." Anna nodded politely and shook his hand. "Nice to meet you," she said. "I've seen you all settling in." "Yeah, we're excited about the place. It's been a dream of mine to start a farm, get away from the city and live off the land," Mike said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "We're thinking about livestock, crops, maybe even some beekeeping." Anna raised an eyebrow. "Beekeeping?" she echoed, surprised. It wasn't something you just jumped into. There was an art to it, a balance to maintain. She wondered if Mike understood that. "Yeah, I've heard it's a good way to make some extra money," Mike continued, oblivious to her hesitation. "I noticed your hives up here. You've been doing this for a while, right?" "For as long as I can remember," Anna said. "It's not just about making money, though. Beekeeping takes patience and understanding. The bees are sensitive to changes in their environment." "Oh, I'm sure I'll get the hang of it," Mike said, waving off her concerns. "I've already ordered a few hives and equipment. Should be here next week." Anna felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She didn't want to seem rude, but the thought of Mike starting a large-scale operation so quickly worried her. "Just be careful," she said gently. "Bees need time to adjust to their surroundings, and you have to be mindful of how much honey you take. If you take too much, the hive can suffer." Mike smiled confidently. "I'll figure it out. How hard can it be?" Anna bit back a sigh. She knew that beekeeping wasn't as simple as it seemed, but Mike clearly had his mind made up. She glanced down the hill, where his kids were playing in the yard, and Laura was sitting on the porch, watching them. "Your family seems nice," Anna said, changing the subject. "They're great," Mike agreed. "Laura's not much of an outdoor person, but she's supportive of my plans. And the kids, well, they're excited about the animals. Sam, my son, keeps asking when we'll get our first cows. I think he's more ready for this farm life than any of us." Anna smiled at the thought of the kids exploring the hills. It reminded her of her own childhood, running through the fields and climbing trees while her mother worked with the bees. But farming wasn't all fun and games. It was hard work, and she wondered if Mike truly understood what he was getting into. "Well, I wish you the best of luck," Anna said, her tone sincere but cautious. "If you need any advice about the bees, feel free to ask." "Thanks, Anna. I appreciate it," Mike said, giving her a thumbs up. "I'll let you know how it goes." As Mike walked back down the hill, Anna stood for a moment, watching him rejoin his family. Laura waved to him, and the kids ran up to tell him something, their laughter echoing through the air. It was a picture-perfect scene, but Anna couldn't shake the feeling that trouble was brewing. Starting a farm was one thing, but starting with bees that could easily be disturbed by too much activity or careless handling, was another. Anna had learned from years of experience that bees needed care, respect, and most of all, balance. She hoped Mike would realize that before it was too late. Back at her hives, Anna knelt down to inspect her bees, her mind still lingering on her new neighbors. The bees buzzed calmly around her, going about their work as usual. She felt a sense of peace here, a connection to something larger than herself. But she knew that peace could be fragile, especially with change on the horizon. She only hoped that the hillside would stay in balance. A week later, Anna watched from her porch as a delivery truck made its way up the hill toward Mike's house. The back of the truck was loaded with brand new beehives, all bright white and shiny, unlike the weathered wood of Anna's own hives. Mike stood proudly in the driveway, waving the truck over as if he were welcoming an old friend. His son, Sam, bounced on his toes, clearly excited about the new arrivals. Anna felt a growing sense of unease. She had warned Mike to start slow, to give the bees time to adjust, but it was clear he hadn't taken her advice to heart. He had ordered not just 1 or 2 hives, but a whole cluster, at least 10 by the look of it. That afternoon, she heard the sound of hammering and saw Mike and Sam setting up the hives in a wide circle near the bottom of the hill, close to the wildflower meadow where her own bees foraged. The sight of it made her stomach twist. Mike had no idea what he was doing. Beekeeping wasn't about numbers or profit. It was about harmony, about working with nature, not against it. Within days, the impact of Mike's new operation became apparent. The air around Anna's hives, once a peaceful hum, now buzzed with frantic energy. Her bees seemed confused, disoriented. Normally calm and steady, they darted in all directions, as if they were searching for something. Anna frowned as she watched them. This wasn't normal. She walked down to her hives to inspect them more closely. Lifting the lid of one, she peered inside. The bees were moving sluggishly, and the honeycomb wasn't as full as it should have been this time of year. She checked the other hives, and the pattern was the same. The bees weren't producing as much honey. Something was wrong. As she stood there, a shadow fell across her. She looked up to see Sam walking over, a shy smile on his face. "Hi, Miss Anna," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "Dad said I could come and ask you some questions about the bees. I want to learn more about them." Anna softened. Sam was a good kid, and it was clear he was curious. "Of course," she said. "What do you want to know?" "Well, Dad says we're going to get a lot of honey this year, but I don't know. The bees seem kind of stressed." Sam looked at the ground, then back up at her. "Is that normal?" Anna shook her head. "No, Sam, it's not. Bees are very sensitive creatures. They don't like big changes. When you bring in too many new hives too quickly, it can confuse them. They start competing for food, and it can hurt both the bees and the plants they rely on." Sam bit his lip. "What should we do? Dad's really excited about all the honey, but I don't want to hurt the bees." Anna sighed, feeling the weight of the situation. She appreciated Sam's concern, but it wasn't that simple. Mike was too focused on profit to see the bigger picture. "You need to tell your dad that the bees need time to adjust. If you keep pushing them like this, the hives won't survive. It's not just about the honey." Sam nodded, looking thoughtful. "I'll talk to him." As the days passed, the problems worsened. Anna's bees continued to struggle. Their honey production dropped even further, and the plants on the hillside, once vibrant and full of life, began to wither. The wildflowers that her bees depended on were being overrun by Mike's hives, which consumed more nectar than the area could support. Anna watched helplessly as the balance of nature began to tip. She had always taken just enough honey to live on, leaving the rest for the bees and the land. But Mike's large-scale operation was draining the resources faster than the hillside could replenish them. The flowers couldn't bloom fast enough, and the bees, both hers and Mike's, were running out of food. One evening, after a long day at the market, Anna returned home to find one of her hives completely abandoned. The bees were gone, the honeycomb half-built and empty. She stood there, staring at the deserted hive, her heart heavy. This had never happened before. The next morning, she decided to confront Mike. As she walked down the hill, she saw him inspecting his own hives, a frown on his face. Even from a distance, Anna could tell that something was wrong. The once bustling hives were quiet, the bees sluggish and fewer in number. "Mike?" Anna called as she approached. He turned to face her, wiping sweat from his brow. "We need to talk." "What's going on?" he asked, sounding frustrated. "My bees aren't doing so well. I thought this was supposed to be easy. You just set up the hives and they make honey, right?" Anna shook her head. "It's not that simple. You've put too much pressure on the bees and the land. There's not enough food for all of them, and now they're suffering. My bees are struggling too, and I've never had this kind of problem before." Mike frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the news. "But I thought more hives meant more honey." "Not if the bees can't find enough nectar," Anna said. "You're overloading the land. The wildflowers can't support this many hives. If you keep going like this, neither of our bees will survive." Mike ran a hand through his hair, looking down at the ground. "I didn't realize it would be this complicated." "It's not too late to fix things," Anna said gently. "But you have to slow down. Give the bees time to recover and give the land a chance to regrow." Mike was silent for a long time, his face full of frustration. Finally, he said impatiently, "I will think about what you said. Give me some more time." As Anna turned to walk back up the hill, she hoped that Mike would follow through on his promise. The balance of the hillside was fragile, and it would take time to heal the damage that had been done. But for now, there was hope. The days grew longer, but the tension between Anna and Mike only deepened. Despite his promise to cut back on the hives, Mike continued to push his operation forward, driven by a stubborn belief that more hives would eventually mean more honey and more profit. The land, however, had other plans. The once vibrant wildflowers on the hillside were now scarce, their colors fading as the bees overharvested the nectar. Anna's own hives, once a source of pride, were now struggling to survive. Anna could feel the change in the air. The quiet harmony of the hillside had been replaced by a strained silence. Her bees, usually so calm, had become restless, swarming aimlessly or abandoning their hives altogether. Every time she opened one of her hives, she was met with the same grim sight: empty cells where honey should have been, lethargic bees barely moving, and in some cases, whole colonies disappearing overnight. The balance of nature was tipping further, and Anna knew it wouldn't take much more to send it crashing down. One afternoon, Anna decided to confront Mike again. She found him near his hives, pacing back and forth, frustration etched across his face. His bees were in no better shape than hers. The once busy hives were eerily quiet, and the few bees that remained buzzed weakly in and out of the entrances. Mike looked up as Anna approached, his expression hardening. "We need to talk," Anna said, her voice steady but firm. "What's there to talk about?" Mike snapped. "My bees aren't doing well, and I'm losing money. This was supposed to be easy." "It's not supposed to be easy," Anna replied, keeping her tone calm. "I told you from the start that beekeeping isn't just about money. It's about balance, about taking care of the land and the bees. You're putting too much pressure on them, and now they're suffering. We all are. Mike shook his head, clearly frustrated. You don't get it, Anna. I need this to work. My family needs it. We've put everything into this farm, and if I slow down now, I might lose everything. I understand that, Mike, Anna said, trying to reach him. But you're not listening to what the land is telling you. The bees are a part of this ecosystem. If they're not thriving, it means the land can't support them. And if you keep pushing like this, nothing will survive. Not your bees, not mine, not the wildflowers. You can't just take without giving back. Mike's jaw tightened, and he turned away from her. I don't have time for this, he muttered. I'll figure it out. Anna sighed, sensing that no amount of reasoning would change his mind. She knew Mike wasn't a bad person, but his desperation for success had blinded him to the damage he was causing. Their once friendly conversations had turned cold and distant, and Anna felt a growing sense of helplessness as the situation spiraled out of control. But while Mike remained stubborn, his son Sam had become a regular visitor to Anna's side of the hill. One morning, as Anna was checking her hives, she noticed Sam standing at the edge of the meadow, watching her quietly. She smiled and waved him over. Hey, Sam, she said. Come to see the bees? Sam nodded, his eyes wide with curiosity. Yeah, I wanted to see how you do it. Dad keeps saying that more hives will fix everything, but I don't know. It doesn't feel right. Anna knelt down next to one of her hives and motioned for Sam to join her. It's not just about the hives, Sam. Bees need a healthy environment to thrive. If there aren't enough flowers for them to feed on, it doesn't matter how many hives you have. The bees will starve. Sam looked thoughtful, his brow furrowing. But Dad says we need more honey to make money. He thinks if we get more bees, we'll get more honey. Anna smiled gently. That's a common mistake people make. But bees can only make honey if they have enough food, nectar from flowers. If there aren't enough flowers, the bees won't have enough to eat, and they won't be able to make honey. It's all connected. Sam glanced over at his father's hives in the distance, then back at Anna. So what should we do? We need to let the land recover, Anna explained. The wildflowers need time to regrow, and the bees need time to adjust. Sometimes slowing down is the best way to help nature thrive. It might mean less honey for a while, but it will be better for the bees in the long run. Sam nodded slowly, absorbing her words. I wish Dad would listen. He's so focused on making money that he's not paying attention to the bees. Anna sighed, understanding Sam's frustration. Your dad cares about your family, Sam. He just needs to see that taking care of the land is just as important as taking care of the farm. Maybe you can help him understand that. Over the next few days, Sam continued to visit Anna, learning more about her methods and the delicate balance that sustained the hillside. He watched as she tended to her hives with care, always mindful of the bees' needs. He saw how the bees responded to her gentle touch, how they seemed calmer around her, and how her hives, though struggling, still held a quiet strength. One evening, as Sam sat at the dinner table with his family, he gathered the courage to speak up. Dad, I've been talking to Miss Anna, he began hesitantly. She thinks we need to slow down with the bees. The wildflowers aren't growing fast enough to feed all of them, and the hives are suffering. Mike looked up from his plate, frowning. Anna's got her way of doing things, but we need to think bigger, Sam. More bees means more honey. But it's not working, Sam insisted. The bees aren't making enough honey because they don't have enough food. We're hurting them by trying to do too much. Mike's expression darkened, and he set his fork down with a clatter. Sam, I appreciate you wanting to help, but I've got this under control. I know what I'm doing. But Dad, Sam started, but Mike cut him off. "No more of this," Mike said firmly. "I'm doing what's best for this farm." The conversation ended there, and Sam sat back in his chair, frustrated but silent. He had tried to reason with his father, but Mike's stubbornness had won out once again. As Sam glanced out the window at the fading light over the hills, he wondered how long the bees and the land could hold on under the strain. The honey season had come and gone, but it was nothing like what Mike had expected. As the months passed, his once bright optimism had dimmed, replaced by frustration and exhaustion. His hives had yielded far less honey than he had anticipated, and his bees were struggling. Every time he opened one of his hives, it was the same story: empty combs, weak colonies, and a haunting silence where there should have been a steady, healthy buzz. It had been a particularly bad season, and now, standing in the yard with the brittle remains of wildflowers scattered at his feet, Mike could no longer ignore the truth. His approach had failed. The land, the bees, everything was out of balance, and he was starting to understand that it wasn't something that more hives or more equipment could fix. Late one afternoon, Mike found himself standing at the edge of Anna's property, hesitating. He had spent weeks trying to salvage his operation, but nothing had worked. It was time to admit that he needed help. He took a deep breath and walked up the hill toward Anna's porch, his hands stuffed in his pockets, shoulders slumped in defeat. Anna was outside, tending to her hives as usual, moving with the quiet grace and patience that Mike had always admired, though he'd never said it out loud. When she saw him approaching, she straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mike," she said, a note of surprise in her voice, "what brings you here?" Mike scratched the back of his neck, suddenly feeling awkward. I need your help," he admitted, his voice low. "I thought I could handle this on my own, but, well, I've made a mess of things. The bees, the land, it's not working, and I don't know what to do." Anna studied him for a moment, her eyes soft with understanding. She could see the strain in his face, the weight of his frustration and disappointment. She had known this moment would come eventually, but she hadn't expected it to be so difficult for Mike to admit. "I'm glad you came to talk to me," Anna said gently. "The bees are resilient, but they need time and care to recover. We can fix this, but it's going to take some work." Mike nodded, relieved that she wasn't angry with him. "What do we need to do?" Anna smiled slightly. "We'll start by scaling back. You have too many hives for the land to support. If we reduce the number, the bees will have a better chance of finding enough food, and we need to give the wildflowers time to grow back. They've been over-harvested by the bees, so the land needs to rest." Mike listened carefully, his mind racing. He had been so focused on expansion and profit that he hadn't thought about the long-term effects. But now, hearing Anna's calm, measured plan, he realized how much he had misunderstood. "I've got some equipment," he said after a moment. "More modern stuff. I thought it would make things easier." "It can," Anna replied. "Technology isn't the problem. It's how you use it. We can merge your modern equipment with some of the traditional methods I use, but we need to keep the bees' needs in mind first." For the first time in weeks, Mike felt a flicker of hope. "All right," he said, nodding. "Let's do it your way." Together, they began the slow process of restoring balance to the hillside. Mike dismantled several of his hives, leaving only a few that the land could support. Anna taught him how to care for the bees in a way that respected the natural rhythm of the environment. They worked side by side, combining Anna's deep knowledge of traditional beekeeping with Mike's modern tools. He learned how to use his equipment to monitor the bees without disturbing them and how to harvest honey in a way that didn't harm the colony. It wasn't an overnight fix. The bees were still weak, and the wildflowers needed time to grow back. But as the days passed, Mike started to see the changes. The bees became more active, their movements steady and purposeful again. The wildflowers, once wilted and sparse, began to bloom once more, filling the air with color and life. Sam, who had been watching the process with growing interest, spent more and more time with Anna, learning about the bees and the delicate balance of the ecosystem. He asked questions, eager to understand how everything was connected, and Anna was happy to teach him. She saw in Sam a passion for the land and the bees that reminded her of her younger self. One afternoon, as Sam helped Anna check one of her hives, he turned to her, his eyes bright with excitement. "I think I want to be a beekeeper when I grow up," he said. "Like you, I want to help take care of the land and the bees." Anna smiled, her heart warming at the thought. "That's a wonderful dream, Sam," she said. "The world needs more people who care about nature, and if you do become a beekeeper, you'll be able to help keep the balance for future generations." Sam beamed, already imagining the future, a future where he could make a difference. He glanced over at his father, who was working with one of his hives nearby, his movements slower, more careful now. Mike had changed. He wasn't as driven by profit anymore. He had learned, through hard experience, that the land couldn't be forced to give more than it could. It needed time, respect, and care. By the end of the season, the bees had begun to recover, and though the honey harvest was smaller than Mike had hoped, it was rich and pure. The land, too, had started to heal, the wildflowers returning in full bloom, their vibrant colors a sign of the balance that had been restored. Mike approached Anna one evening as the sun set over the hills, casting a golden glow over the meadow. "Thank you, Anna," he said quietly. "I couldn't have done this without you." Anna smiled. "We did this together. It wasn't easy, but you listened. That's the most important part." Mike nodded, understanding now that the land and the bees had their own way of telling you what they needed. You just had to be willing to hear it. As they stood there, watching the bees return to their hives, Sam joined them, a grin on his face. "I think we did a good job," he said proudly. Anna and Mike exchanged a glance, both smiling at Sam's enthusiasm. "I think you're right," Anna said softly. And as the bees buzzed contentedly around them, Anna knew that the balance had been restored, not just in the land, but in their lives as well.